All right, so thank you all so much for coming. I'm gonna minimize this screen here so that nobody's staring at anybody else. So just real quick, welcome to this resume presentation. I'm gonna go through the slides fairly quickly here, but let me know how I can answer any additional questions you all have after this. If I can get my slides to advance. Why are you not advancing? There we go. Okay, so first things first, I did jet 1,000 million years ago. But here's some pictures of me doing jet things, including this nice little shot at the bottom of the big old group of us. And so just for the record, I just want to let you all know that I am also a jet alum. This is where I lived right on Lake Toya in Hokkaido. After I got back from Japan, I don't know if this will sound familiar to you, but I spent a lot of time just kind of bumbling around, feeling super lost, being very unclear what I wanted to do when I grew up. And at some point afterwards, in fact, 2006 is when I finished my graduate degree. I wound up going to grad school for a counseling master's degree. And I've been doing this kind of work ever since. I've worked with lots and lots and lots of JET alums on things like their resumes. So I have a lot of really good experience that I hope to share with you all today. So just so you have a sense of it, this is some of the stuff that we are going to cover today. I won't belabor this and I won't read it to you because you all can read. So let us jump right in and get to some of these basics. And for those of you who are live on the call, I have a couple of things that I will share with you, but since it's just me here today running the call, I won't worry about putting them in the chat as I talk about them, because that's gonna make the screen look all funky. So just first basic here, when you're writing a resume, what you want is to go for a pretty basic setup for it. Now, I know that you can go to Canva and get super fancy setup, or you can find all kinds of like crazy fancy bullet points or whatever the heck, but I really don't recommend that, because what you'll find is that those kinds of things really take up a lot of space on the document, and a lot of the applicant tracking systems, which are the bots that read the documents before the humans do, can't make sense out of those. So really nice and basic is how you want to go. I don't have specific rules on the fonts that you should use, but go for something pretty basic. I'm a little old fashioned, or possibly just old. I tend to like Times New Roman. Also, you can use Arial, you can use Calibri. I kind of think Calibri is an ugly font, but that's just me. You can use anything that's fairly standard for your the body of your document. You can go a little teeny tiny bit crazier with your name, but make sure that it's really easy to read. Don't do some super fancy calligraphy font or anything like that. And you really want to go for the body of the document, sort of font size 10, 11, or 12. Your name can be much, 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 much bigger. I would recommend sort of a size 16 or 18 font for your name. But everything else can be that sort of 10, 11, 12. Just choose a size that you think makes sense. You don't want to get a lot smaller than a 10-point font, because certain aging eyeballs start to have a little bit of trouble reading it. So a nice 10 is probably the smallest you want to go. In terms of your margins, you want to go for the fairly standard margins that are preset in things like Word and Google Docs. Don't go crazy making super skinny margins or anything like that. It starts to get really hard to read and to look really crowded. Also, for the setup, you want to go for pretty simple. Don't go, over the top with like dozens of call out boxes and lots of columns and that sort of thing. And I don't really like tables. Tables do really funny things to your formatting. So I would go for much more basic than that. I will occasionally do a column for a single section, but that would be something pretty specific, like if you wanted to list, for instance, your relevant undergrad coursework, something like that. Your length, we'll get a little bit more into here, but 1 or 2 pages is what you want. And I really like the bullet points versus the paragraphs. No photos. You don't need hobbies unless they relate to what you do. And your formatting, you're going to want a PDF or a Word generally for your formatting. If you are using something like Word or Google Docs, try to avoid putting your name in as an actual header. And that's just because a lot of those applicant tracking systems can't actually read headers very well. So it will assume that you don't have any contact information on there. And the problem really with that is that there are some systems that will decide that you're not a real person if it can't find contact info on there. So if you will be submitting your resume as either a Word document or a Google Doc, don't put in a header. However, if you are simply writing the thing in Google Docs or Word, you may absolutely throw your name into the header, because then if you convert it to a PDF, it's all going to read the same way. All right, trying to get through this quickly. So sections I recommend are a nice summary at the top that really categorizes the best stuff about you. That can be hard skills, like any tech skills you have, languages that you speak. Side note, don't just put in like JLPT 3 and 3, because nobody else knows what that means. Tell them what it means. Give a little bit of context for it. You know, and the summary can also include things like your soft skills. So that would be things like communication, public speaking, those kinds of things. I'll talk a little bit more about soft skills, but the main thing to keep in mind really is that you want to quantify the soft skills a tiny bit, which means you don't just want to say excellent communication skills. You want to say something like excellent communication skills demonstrated in X number of years living and working overseas. Something like that to give it a little bit of background so that they know that you're not just kind of claiming a set of skills that you don't actually have. That's no good, right? For your relevant experience section, you get to make all of the decisions about what counts as relevant and what doesn't. So that is totally up to you. I would recommend a section towards the top. So you have your summary and then your relevant experience. I would recommend that you put your relevant experience section in chronological order, even if it's not a straight up chronology. So for instance, if during this crazy pandemic time, you have taken a little bit of a break from your kind of bigger career path, let's say you're doing something like, I don't know, working at a coffee shop, then you're not going to put the coffee shop experience under your relevant experience. You're going to put it further down under your other experience, but within the relevant experience, you will have what you've done arranged in chronological order. And then you'll hop down to the next section, which is your other professional experience. And that's also going to be in a chronological order. Then you'll have your education. For your education, you really only need anything that is a 4-year degree or above. So you'll have your bachelor's degree in there. If you have a master's degree, you'll put that in there. If you have since gotten some kind of certification, you can put that in there. You can put other courses you've taken under something like a header, like, I don't know, ongoing education, something like that. Those are the really essential sections. Now, I mentioned hobbies a little bit, and here's the tricky thing about hobbies. If you have a relevant hobby, I'm going to turn myself back on so I'm not just talking into the void. If you have a relevant hobby, then you do in fact want to list it. However, you can put it actually under your relevant experience there. So here's my example of that. A few years ago, I was doing some practice interviewing with someone who was, I think, majoring in like space commercialization, sort of specific major within aerospace science. And one of the things that he did in his free time is he actually built little model rockets, like from scratch, and launched them. They actually flew. They didn't get to space, you know, they actually flew. And it was something that he hadn't mentioned anywhere in his paperwork, his cover letter or resume, but we were sort of chatting before we got into the practice interview and he mentioned it. And so in a case like that, I said, you know, you really actually want to be sure you mention that, because what your hobby is relates really, really directly to what you hope to be doing with this major when you finish. So if you have any hobbies that are like that, definitely put them in. If you aren't sure how relevant your hobbies are, then throw them up on LinkedIn, because that way they're still discoverable, but they're not taking up real estate on your resume. All right. I'm going to get more into this in a bit, but one of the things that you really want here is bullet points for your verbs. I like a fairly visible bullet. You'll see some that are just a really small dash. I find those a little bit hard to see. The reason I like a nice sort of bolder bullet point is that I think it really draws the eye in nicely, makes it so that you can really see where all of those points are. So it makes a little bit more of a breakup of the reading. It makes it just easy to kind of pop in and pull the necessary information out very quickly. When you have them, do put in something that kind of speaks to why you did what you did or what happened from it. So for instance, you don't just want to say something like, led English conversation classes. You want to give enough context that people know why you would lead English conversation classes and if anything came of it. So for instance, if a couple of people in your office wanted to have some kind of Eikaiwa type classes so that they could take a group trip to Canada, then your bullet point becomes something like led informal English language learning for adults planning a trip to Canada, resulting in their self-reported higher levels of confidence during their travels. So there don't always have to be numbers that you associate with the things, but it's nice to have something that you put in there just to kind of back it up a little bit and to give a bit of a rationale for doing all the things that you've done. You also want to spend more time on the resume really focused on your accomplishments and not on your routine duties. So what does that mean? That means I see a lot of resumes that have things in there like, for instance, answer phones. Well, yeah, right? It's the 21st century. I'm really hopeful that you are capable of answering a phone now. If you want to speak to the phone answering, if that was a really big part of what you did and it captures some larger stuff, then you'll say something like answer phones and, prioritized calls in order of urgency or something like that, so that people sort of understand, again, the rationale. Why do I care that you answered the phones? And so accomplishments over routine duties as much as you possibly can. Don't freak yourself out. I do have a worksheet to share about this, but when you're thinking about JET, really think creatively about all of the kinds of stuff you did when you were in Japan. So it becomes very easy to focus on the very specific routine kinds of duties, taught English classes, that kind of thing. But the truth is that expands into a much bigger picture, right? So a lot of what you did probably, if you were an AET, is give some context, like you probably taught a lesson on something like Halloween. And so you would teach like, we dress up funny and go door to door asking for candy, right? You probably gave them something kind of fun and interesting with that. I did a class, my students were really baffled by this idea of a nation of immigrants. And so I taught a class in which we talked a lot about food. And then afterwards, we had gotten permission from the kitchen and we went down and made some marinara sauce and spaghetti. Bigger picture stuff is kind of what you're thinking about with all of this. So jot down some notes for yourself. How do the various experiences you had in Japan translate into something bigger? So again, don't hyper focus on those skills, but think about like, how did volunteering with the soft tennis club increase your students' comfort with speaking English? How did attending all school assemblies with your students make them feel more comfortable with you and increase the rapport they had with you? Just things like that that are sort of bigger picture. And you'll see my last point here is be sure you don't include things that you don't want to do. If you did some translation work, but you didn't enjoy doing it, that gets to stay off the document because otherwise you're going to get asked to do a lot of translation work. So here is a very quick little sample of some of what you might say in the document. This is something that I will share with you all. This is actually just taken from a sort of a semi-real resume that I put together specifically for this presentation. This is all stuff I actually did, and this, important. But I did kind of fluff the resume a little bit so it does look a little bit more generic. Anyway, just to kind of give you an idea of what some of these pieces might look like there. And so you'll see that I don't have stuff like taught English. You'll see that I have things like demonstrated how to internationalize students, created cross-cultural understanding, etc. So that is kind of the idea that we are going for. All right. So I have mentioned applicant tracking systems a couple of times. What the heck are they and why do you need to care about them? So applicant tracking systems are basically bots that are there to weed out people who are not qualified for the positions. They are getting smarter. They used to be super literal. Now they usually have some kind of AI as part of what they do. But any computer program, of course, is only as smart as it was programmed to be. And so they're a little bit tricky and pretty confusing. There is a really great system that you can use, though. It's called Cultivated Cultures, and it's a resume comparison tool. So what you'll do in a system like that, there are other ones that exist. Resume Worded is one, and Job Scan is another. What you'll do with any of them is you paste your resume in on one side and the job description in on the other side, and it compares them. And then afterwards, what the system is going to do is tell you where you're falling short. So it'll say things like the job description says communicated 5 times and you've only said it twice in your resume. So you'll get a sense of kind of what keywords you need to express a little bit more. And some of the better ones will also tell you, this is a little bit cliched, see if you can come up with a different way to say this one thing. All right. General tips for your resume. Don't make yourself crazy, by the way, with any of this, but you're aiming for 1 to 2 pages. If you opt for the 2-page length, fill up the second page so that it's worth having, right? You want it to be worth being there, excuse me. And you want for it to make a lot of sense when people look at it. You don't want it to be like 4 lines on the second page, because then the person who's reading it is like, why do I even have to read the second page, right? So do use up that second page if you do it. Go with a really nice, simple format, save it, ideally as a PDF, but if they say submit it as a Word or Google Doc, then you absolutely have that option. P.S. If you would like to send your resume to me for a review, I actually prefer them in Google Doc or Word because I can then get it and edit them much more easily. But then we'll take a look at it in PDF just to make sure the formatting hasn't gone a little bit funky, which occasionally does when it sort of translates over into that. Pay attention to what you think is the most important stuff. The more important the stuff is, the higher up on the document it should be. But again, you get to make that decision. So your call there, but do think through what you think is really important about your experiences and so forth. Do tailor your resume for each job. I know that is more work. I'm sorry. It's the way to go. And the reason is, if you've ever been on a search committee where you're kind of helping choose who gets interviewed and maybe even ultimately who gets the job, one of the things that you will notice is that it's very clear who has done the tailoring of the resume for the job. And you're going to feel a lot more invested in that person because that person has just taken the extra 20 minutes to use the language that you use in your job posting to explain why your organization is the one they want to work at, et cetera. So you'll want to do some light tailoring, at least, of both your resume and your cover letter for any job that you apply to. We can talk a little bit more specifically about that, but you do really want to be sure that you're capturing that kind of stuff. Be honest in the document, but also be positive. And this is a little bit more for cover letters, but I see a lot of times people will write something like, while I lack the experience you mentioned, I have this. Don't do that. It sounds kind of apologetic and you don't have anything to be apologetic for. If you don't have exactly the experience you're looking for, but you have something that can sort of swap in for it, you're just going to emphasize the second part of that. You're going to say, I have extensive experience using this point of sale system, which I imagine is quite close to the one you use, or something like that in the body of it. The last point, I'm not 100% sold on, so it's your call. I've said to include dates. Now, the reason I'm not entirely sold on that is obviously you want to include some dates in the documents, like your most recent job experiences. You want to go back sort of roughly 10 years if you have that much experience. The tricky part with including dates is that at some juncture, what will begin to happen is people may start using, say, an older college graduation date against you, if you will. You might start getting into some tricky stuff around age discrimination. If that happens, let's say you're going into a field like maybe tech, where there's a lot of age discrimination, you have the option to take off things like your college graduation dates. On that note, you don't need the range for your college dates. You don't have to put the year you started and the year you finished. You only have to put the year you finished. You also only have to put your degree granting institution. So if you went to one school and then transferred, you don't have to put them both in your resume. They'll see that kind of, if they get to the point where they're really serious about you, you'll send them the transcripts and they'll see that you transferred. All they care about is who granted you the degree. So anyway, there's my little side note. Now, I am going to stop this share for now and do another quick share just so you all can see some of this. Let me grab this. All right, so here is a nice blank resume for you to take a look at. I will share this as well, but you'll see here that obviously I've got my logo and USJDA's at the top. Don't put those on, but you'll see there's this nice, really big boldface name here. You'll see you don't need a thorough address on your resume, but you'll want to put city, state, and zip code just because those are ways that the systems can tell that you're real. You'll want 2 or 3 ways for them to contact you. And I do recommend a LinkedIn profile URL if you have a LinkedIn account. It gives them another way to look at you and get a sense of who you are. And then we have summary of qualifications here, professional experience, and then page 2, name nice and big at the top, more professional experience, education, any kind of memberships, that kind of thing. So hopefully this gives you an idea. The thing I would really most like to draw your attention to is this summary at the very beginning that says, conversational spoken Japanese and basic spoken and written Spanish, for instance. And I have a little worksheet that I will send out to you as well that really lets you think about all of the stuff that you did on JET and how it might be more broadly applicable. I also have a skills list if you want to go through those, and these will help you kind of figure out some stuff about your specific resume and that sort of thing. So there's that. And let me again pull up my contact information here. So if you have any questions about this, or if you would like me to review your resume with you, I will be more than glad to do so. Just email me. Email is the best way to reach me. So you'll send a quick email to emily@denvercareercatalyst.com and send me your resume and just tell me you were in this workshop, and I will be glad to do that with you. So now that was a lot of me talking. I'm going to stop recording here and we can have a little bit of a discussion.